Full Service Radio is proudly supported and hosted by Simplecast, the easiest way for a podcast creator to publish and distribute audio on the internet. For more information, visit simplecast.com.
Recorded live from the lobby of the Line Hotel in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C.
Peace and welcome to the Edible Activist Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa L. Jones, broadcasting live from the lobby of the Line, D.C. On this show, you hear from the voices of dynamic Black people and people of color in the agriculture, food justice, and healing space as they share empowering food narratives and perspectives that stem from the land, all while exemplifying the spirit of activism in their own edible way. Let's get started. Peace, everyone, and welcome to the Edible Activist Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa L. Jones, broadcasting live from the lobby of the Line, D.C. here on Full Service Radio. So last week, I kicked off Black History 365 Part 1 with my two comrades, Jeremy Carey, a.k.a. Veggie Promo, and Maisha Taylor, a.k.a. I Am Maisha on the gram. We talked about everything from how we choose to acknowledge our history, paying homage to our brave ancestors, and giving much needed credit to those planting the seeds of our future. So I'm back this week with part 2, and I'm super excited because I get to invite super dope guests back to the studio. And I have today Geoff Edwards.
What's up?
In the building.
What's good? In the building.
And for those who don't know Geoff, first of all, he's been here a couple times. Last time I had you in the studio, we talked about it was titled Ancestral Conversations.
Yes.
But Geoff is, on top of being an awesome father, awesome husband to a dope wife, if she's listening, she's super dope. He is an herbalist, an acupuncturist. I'm also even going to call you an educator in some respects. You know, he's done nature walks, herbal walks here in the city. You guys just need to check him out. But towards the end of the show, I'm actually going to have him shout out his information so that you guys can follow him. I've actually even been a patient of his, okay, with acupuncture. I need to come back. I've fallen off. But I was there, brother. I was there. So, as I said, you know, last week we did part 1, Black History 365. I had mentioned that I don't feel compelled to do a special month of Black History because what I do every week, almost every other day, is I interview amazing Black and brown folks in food and agriculture, right? Year round, 365.
That's it. You do it. You're making the history and conveying the stories of the history, and it's always.
You know, and someone told me that documenting our oral history is super important, and it definitely goes down here every week. So, and I'm grateful. But we are continuing the conversation. So on to part 2, definitely, you know, some of the things that we're going to cover is that we're going to get Geoff's, I'm interested in learning how Geoff chooses to honor his Black history, not just in the month of February. We're not confined to the month of February, but year round, and especially as an herbalist, you know, and really getting into some of those rituals that any of us can incorporate to honor those who've come before us and to just honor the spaces that we're creating and to honor the land, which should be ongoing, right? And the other thing that we're going to cover is that we're going to really place a lens on education and Black history. And Geoff is probably going to explode during that piece. But first, I want to start off by asking you, Geoff, how do you choose to honor your Black history every day, every other day, monthly, whatever that looks like for you? Or how do you choose to redefine how you're honoring your Black history?
No, definitely. First, thanks, dear. Thanks for having me on. I mean, it starts. You have to have the intention, and for me, it's with the intention each day of seeking out stories in particular that are about the history, my history, and we'll talk about this. I'm going to keep throwing out like genealogy and family stories, and history is how you keep Black history alive, and spending your dollars with Black businesses to keep, allow entrepreneurs to shine and, do their thing and make Black history. But really, like, those stories is where it's at, whether it's like reading biographies throughout the year, including and being in spaces intentionally with my family, with my sons, where they're exposed to our history, not just during this month.
Right.
They get that, from home, but then being in spaces where they're learning their music, their culture, their art, and really getting it like directly hands-on.
Yes.
That's how you maintain it all year round.
Yes.
And,
And you know what? Geoff not playing. I always thinking you when I hear the word genealogy, like you're big on that. You're big. And you know what? I thought about you because when I was in Mississippi, everyone knows recently I was in Mississippi not too long ago, and I did an entire podcast series, right? And I was at my grandmother's house, and I remember, I think it was the last show that you were on, you talked about, when you're digging back into your lineage, one of the things you should question is what your grandmother grew and what your grandmother's grandmother grew, vice versa. And so I was talking to my grandmother, and we were in the backyard, and she was growing collard greens. And I had a photo of my great grandmother with my mom on the right and my aunt on the left. And I literally just sat there because my great grandmother apparently loved to grow collards.
There it is.
And I thought, I was like, check homework.
Check. And now you got to have your collards.
You got to have your collards, okay?
You got to have different varieties.
Yes.
You got to take it to the next level.
Yes. But that moment was so significant for me to take that photo because I was like, wow, like my grandmother is growing collard greens and her mother enjoyed growing collard greens. And we talked about me digging into my lineage, and I'm still doing my homework, but I'm intentional. I'm very intentional about it, but that's also key. You said the word about being intentional. We have to want to be intentional about connecting and honoring our these spaces and our ancestors, because if it's not there, you just don't do it.
You have to. If you go seeking and looking for your family's stories, they are there. They're waiting for you to be discovered. They're waiting for you to tell them. And that's what, that's really what my life, this whole next chapter that's unfolding now, that's what it's completely about. So that's, you have to seek them out. And when you seek them out, they like, this is like the stories are there. And the information. And then from that, I mean, it's kind of this vertical process, but then it's also very horizontal as far as when you connect to this family member and the stories of their particular family and those plants or what was in their garden. And then you learn about like their health, what was going on, like what were the things that they faced, and how they, managed, how they dealt with it, how they cured and treated these things. And then you just began compiling all this vast information.
Wow.
And it keeps growing. Because it's
growing.
never no end to, family lines.
Wow. Yeah. The roots just keep on going. That reminds me, most recently I was at an event and I decided to print photos of the work that I've been doing with the podcast and talking to different growers and gardeners. And shout out to Lita Harrison, who is I still claim my amazing photographer, although she's in Austin, okay? She's my photographer, okay? And I printed these photos out, and I remember actually last week I was sharing them with Jay and Maisha, and just the responses that I was getting from everyone, like, whoa, like this is so beautiful. Capture. And it was just a reminder, like, digital world is great. It's awesome, right? But I plan on printing out every single thing. And I was just like, look at this compilation of history makers, people who are actually making history. To just see that in physical form and just having that photo, and you think like 50 years out, 30 years out, God willing, like, whoa, like
having it like though, when you start talking about photos, and being able to look at pictures down the line, like I'm thankful for those studio sessions wherever they were going, where our ancestors were sitting down when they had cameras and they had dressed out in their, their best of whatever, and sitting down, and we have those pictures.
And we have those photos.
And I have them, and I've been collecting them, and I'm working with them, and that's what my art is about, those photos and the stories and the plants. It's like it's all coming together. Yeah.
But that's a true way to not only stay connected, but to honor your family and to stay connected to our history, holding on to those memories, and to also look at those photos. I hope this isn't weird, do you ever look at those photos and just wish that you can just be in there for just a moment?
Yeah.
That's not weird,
all
right?
the time. It's not weird.
Oh my goodness.
It's not weird.
I was like, I just want to feel what they're feeling right now, which I'm sure is a myriad of things. And I just want to be with them right now. And to me, that's holding on, and that's, you call that pride, you can call it whatever you want, but it's just like, I want to be in that moment with them. And I think that moment is so beautiful. Yeah. So beautiful.
Like hands, when I think about the stories of my grandfather's hands, and I look at the photos and see his hands in the picture and just look at all the different stories of things that he did. I mean, both my grandfathers, and just things that they built, things that they used their hands to provide, and
wow,
overlapping many of the things that I do to this day. And it's just something that's small, just that you,
Yeah, it's small, but it's significant.
There's a lot of depth to it, yeah.
So as an herbalist, Geoff, what are some of the ways, or what are some practices or rituals, or I don't know if there's another term, correct me, because I'm not the professional in all of this, but what are some of the things that we can do with intentionality to honor those who came before us, those our food heroes, our ag heroes, our educators, those who really fought for us to be able to vote? All of it's connected. And whether it's something that you do or something that you suggest to others to help them to remain connected, what are some of those, how can we use herbs or sounds, music, sound bowls, to honor our history?
I mean, when it comes to plants, the first part we've already mentioned is once you find out there was a particular vegetable, or you have a story for a particular herb that a grandparent or someone used, it starts with cultivating or growing that.
Wow.
But you don't want to have it outside of the context of okay, you want to eat collard greens, but then you need to grow collard greens. You need to get some collard greens and germinate the seeds. You need to go from the full process from seed to seed. And spend time with, literally you have to spend the time with this plant. And it's a lot of information that you learn in that process.
Yeah.
It's a lot of process.
Yeah.
As far as being able to access those stories, and it's not really challenging to go about. You just have to set aside the time.
Right.
Really.
That's the intention.
Right.
Intention in making the time to do that.
And then also in the landscapes as well. So the plants that you find out, and then if you can necessarily go to the places where, if you have the opportunity to go and look at where they cultivated the actual land and be in those spaces.
So I don't mean to cut you off. I told my when I did my last interview with my big mom, my big daddy, I said, Big Ma, I need to go to Mount Olive, because that's where my grandmother grew up, where my great-grandfather was a sharecropper, and they grew up, they grew food, everything there, but they grew up in Mount Olive. I said, I need to go there next time I'm back in Mississippi. I really do need to go there.
It's calling you, yeah.
No, and I told my mom, I said, I need to go to Butler. And I've been to Butler once, but I was like, I need to go back. But it is calling me.
Yeah. And it's, and spaces have memories. So, and it's only certain memories that are going to be accessible to you if you go and be in those spaces. And then it's absorb. You have to absorb in a certain, it's all up in your double helix. It's things that you got to activate.
What's my double helix? Don't be throwing all these fancy words at me.
It's in your DNA.
It's in my DNA.
It's in your blood. It's in your DNA. And there's certain things that being and spending times in reverence and in respecting those spaces, and then carrying on, and then telling the stories and calling out the names.
Yeah.
That's how you make it full circle. And
yeah.
Then,
Oh, wow. And for me, I think this is what I said last week, charge my head, not my heart. But it's remembering those places and those spaces through stories, through photos, through food, that allows me to continue to honor my history, my culture, my Black culture, and to embrace it and not look at it as a thing, because some people do. But again, not everybody does, has intention that happened in the past or moving forward. That's really, it's a big part of me. And I feel like there's a certain level of power that you tap into in terms of like knowing who yourself is and that self-identity. Because if I didn't have that, I don't know if I'll be able to do what I do now. And that is holding on to, being able to go back and tell the stories of some of the stories that I know of my great grandparents, and being able to honor their history and keep it alive, not just to February, but forever.
Always.
Always. So anyway, for those who are just tuning in, I'm Melissa L. Jones, host of the Edible Activist podcast, broadcasting live here from the lobby of the Line, DC. I'm here on Full Service Radio. I am joined by the amazing Geoff Edwards, herbalist, acupuncturist. I'm sure he got some other, what do you call it? Some other ABCs behind your name. He's a dad, husband.
Just dad. Pops.
Dad, pops. Musician. Like you're into music too?
I'm into music. My son is the one who's really like taking up that charge. But yeah, definitely music background. We have a very music and arts friendly home.
Yes. Well, briefly tell your story. Isn't there someone on your side of the family that isn't there like a music icon connection?
Right. I mean, there's actually a few. So on one side, in terms of like when we talk about like the Delta blues, my great grandfather John Fair, who lived in Kilmichael, Mississippi. He
shout out the SIP,
and then his brother Archie. So they were part of a group of folks in that area who were real instrumental. Like for example, B.B. King, who happened to grow up in that home, but then also my grandfather ended up marrying B.B.'s cousin. So it's through that way. And then on my dad's side, we have a couple generations where Reuben Carroll, that was 3 times great grandfather.
Okay.
Reuben and Minerva, that was my 2 times great grandmother. They had several children. One of the daughters who happened to be Sam Cooke's mom, and so Carrie Carroll, who's my grandmother's father. So see that. So this is the other piece. Like you gotta learn. You gotta when you know your family. See like okay, this is the connection. That's why I mean it goes lateral as far as your lineages. But then there's so many horizontal stories and connections to things that when you go in all directions with your genealogy, you learn.
Do you have any of those photos? Like any photos?
I have lots of photos,
oh my gosh.
In the process of gathering more. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Do you sit down with your son?
Yeah.
Especially the one who's taking the charge and what does that look like for you?
I mean, it's just they've been getting it since they're little. It just goes from starting off playing the music in the background at the house. It's kind of like your own subliminal background music. It's like just things you want.
It was in your DNA.
It was in your DNA. So being exposed to that, and then making sure that they play in the exposure, to these different things. But yeah, we talk about it. We sit down and look at the pictures. They get the same story told over 40, 50 times, the same way my father told the same stories over, and that's how the repetition.
Oh my gosh.
You get the stories, the stories because you've been told the same stories. We're going to keep looking at the same
and
pictures.
then your son going to continue to tell them stories.
Keep telling those stories. Yeah.
Black History 365.
That's it.
Whoa. I love that so much. Guys, we're going to take a really short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to Perfect Day, produced by Artists Authentic. For more of Authentic's work, visit allornothingstudios.com. welcome back. This is Melissa L. Jones here with the Edible Activist Podcast, broadcasting live from the lobby of the Line DC here on Full Service Radio. I've been chatting here with the amazing Geoff Edwards, and this is Black History 365 Part 2, continuing our conversations from last week about how we honor Black history and some of the things that we can do to tap back into our lineage and remembering our stories and retelling our stories and looking at vivid photos and telling these stories to our kids so that they can retell these stories. And we actually just left off by Geoff sharing some of the music icon connections that he has within his family and his lineage. He knows it. You got it. He's big on genealogy. Really big on genealogy, which is something that I've been looking into, something that I've been very intentional about. And for me, it is, I want to be in the spaces where my great-grandparents and their great-grands and those who came before them, where they used to cultivate the land, where they used to live, where they used to garden, where they used to grow, and just being able to make that connection and honor those connections and remember that and holding on to that. Again, our Black history is not confined to the month of February. This is something every single day that I would hope a lot of us would want to be intentional about. But as Geoff said, it's about setting the intention. And so this show and every other show is really just a reminder that we have always, Black history is American history. And it's not, again, we're not limited to 1 month. We built America, and our culture is rich. It's deep. It's complicated too. It's complicated, but then it isn't complicated. Yeah. But there have been some complications.
There's some complications there.
There's definitely some complications. And so one of the things, for the second half of this show, I definitely want to point to education, right? Geoff, there was a reason. Well, let me go back. So last week, and you and I talked about this just right before the show, I attended an amazing event. I was actually part of an amazing event hosted by Kamari Norman of DPR, Department of Parks and Recreation, and it was a panel for Black history. Amazing women in food, Amanda Stevenson over at the Food Factory in Southeast. You had Zachary Dreaming Out Loud, Violet King, farm manager at Kelly Miller. And at the very start of that program, Kamari actually carved out time to have an amazing braider show the audience how our ancestors, our slaves, our beautiful women used to braid seeds into their hair in order to bring them over here.
It's deep.
It's deep, right? And this was a full room, and everyone was blown away, right? And I've had some knowledge about it. I've read about it. I mean, it was something that I'd known. My homeboy Jay, he was at the event, and he wasn't hip. He didn't know, and it just made me think, and I just got chills. Because whenever I hear stories about our ancestors being on these slave ships, and the whole transatlantic slave, I get chills because, again, it's weird. I almost place myself into that space and wow, they endured so much. But when I think about history and what wasn't taught to me, obviously this wasn't one of the stories. And that education piece is so big because still to this day, we aren't being taught our true history, our true story, his story. We are not being taught that. And again, it was an amazing presentation. And again, just another reminder, the stuff that's growing over here, our ancestors brought that over here.
Yeah.
It just didn't show up. So when you also try to extract us out of stories and you glorify agriculture as this white millennial thing to do, this is a reminder, again, no shade to anyone. I'm friends with everybody, but it was a reminder, and that it sinks in and it soaks in to say we were beyond a contribution to America, beyond. But anyway, my point and where I really want to focus on, and I had to bring that up because that's stuff that people don't know. We aren't being taught the real stories. As a dad to 3 wonderful boys that I haven't even met yet, but I'm calling them wonderful because you're great, and I know they're great, and I know you don't pass anything down but greatness to them.
Hopefully.
Someone who are you still homeschooling?
Still homeschooling to this day. Oh yeah.
I'm really interested in your perspective on that education piece. And that was intentional for you because I know it started off as a food thing because they had like severe allergies and you couldn't place them and you just couldn't trust the food system. That's a whole other thing. I mean, the
whole other
food system
conversation.
inside the school. Okay. Yeah. But there was also, you wanted to make sure that they were being educated on their African principles and beliefs. Like you wanted them to be rooted in that. Rooted.
And I mean, and shout out, to my wife, because even before we even started homeschooling, this was when we only had our oldest at the time. And the conversation of homeschooling, we spoke about it, but had never done it. And so it took until my second son and him being of like school age and, like you say, experiencing a lot of the things with the allergies and such, which kind of forced us into the space. But it was a blessing in disguise because it allowed us to just be able to get a glimpse. And this was at the time just homeschooling one child at the difference, because basically it was like we had a science experiment in our own home. Because my oldest son was still in the public school while my youngest came out at kindergarten. So after a couple years, it was things that just stood out glaring. It was like things that we could tell about the socialization, how they say, oh, your kids need to be in this space to get, but the socialization process was palpable. You could see the difference between the two kids, and thankfully we were able to pull Tim out early enough. And I mean, we've been on a track, but now they're good. But I want to go back to one thing you said when you mentioned you said we were taught, and that's the issue. We were being taught by curriculums and ideas and theories and such that were not of us. It wasn't our story. Yes. It wasn't us contextualizing life through our own lens, through our windows. We were looking at our own lives as if we're on the outside of our life looking into the window at us, as opposed to being in the house of our own history, our own culture. Yes. And letting other people look, or who wants. You can look and see, but not being in the house of the retelling of our stories. And so, in those initial years of homeschooling our boys, we had the opportunity through our homeschool, one of the homeschool collectives, Sankofa Homeschool Collective, where the good brother Obi Egbuna, who he teaches some of the history programming or the history classes with the Sankofa Homeschool. And so they got, a good foundation in just the fact that there's other narratives and other stories that orient us as Black folks, as descendants of Africans, as descendants of indigenous folks, and what makes us into the people we are now, and the fact that could be. But right now, our focus is beyond that, and it's the only history. This is how I stand, how I feel it now. The only history that's important is your family history. You don't need to learn. Like, why are we learning other people's family lines and bloodlines? And why are we learning other people's stories and what they did? Like, the only history you really need to be learning is who was your great-grandfather? Who was your great-grandmother?
Because it all goes back.
Who was your grandmama? What was this in these stories, both vertical genealogy and horizontal, and gathering those stories and then contextualizing the times and what was going on through the eyes of your own family. That's it. That's history for us.
That's history.
When our homeschool, as part of, the system, we have to, you do the homeschool reviews, multiple times a year. But our history curriculum program now is family history. We go to the land. We go spend time with Uncle.
Whoa.
We go out into the country and do this, and we document this, and we archive our own family history. We do this together as a group. We don't. We're not letting other narratives and other stories and then try to figure out how do we contextualize our family and our blood into other stories. It's twisted, And so that's it.
Wow.
And that's our approach. And so, starting from the history and then just looking at all aspects of education and things that we come up, what homeschooling truly is deliberation, because it opens you up to create that narrative for yourself. If you don't have the narrative, if you don't have the benefit of having those stories, it, puts you in the place to at least find other community and people who are doing it and figure how to jump into the flow. And so, I recommend everyone, just, homeschooling just on that front alone. But then again, the blessing in disguise is because when you put your children's education first, for us, our experience has been, is very challenging because you have to breaking from the education system of your children requires a restructuring of the way you navigate in this society in general. We shift in who can be home, who can do this. It shifts like how do we work, and then it breaks you from the mode of no, we have to be entrepreneurs. We have to set our own. We have to be on top of our game. This has to be about our wealth, our legacy, being entrepreneurs, us dictating, us having the flexibility, us creating our own spaces to do what we want and not trying to be in other folks' spaces and tell our stories. We're in our spaces. I'm in my studio. I'm in my clinic teaching the medicine of my family. My wife is in her studio telling her stories of her, legacy and her family through her artistry, and from that, it navigates to where you do whatever the hell you want. But it's not like overnight. You have to be
right.
in that.
Exactly.
We're 8 years in the process now of doing this and
Wow,
still
you said
learning.
8 years.
Still learning as folks, and we've had the benefit of being in an area where we've had massive support and see the way so many types of families do it. In our situation, we have a father, mother, children, and we're able to balance and do it that way. But I wouldn't deter. I see all forms of families doing it, from single parents to co-parenting families in different models and ways, but the community piece is there. We teach each other's children. We're accountable to them, and they grow up seeing that example, and hopefully they continue to homeschool and take on the responsibility of creating space to carry on our stories.
I felt that in my soul.
Genealogy is the only history, period.
Genealogy.
Your genealogy, that's the only history you need to be focused on.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Then if some other piece of this contextualizes it with, okay, this was going on while it was the 1918 flu. Then you figure out, okay, what's going on and what were people doing. You navigate and tie in the stories. Or this was going on and it was the Civil War. This was going on. Then you understand it, but you're not understanding it, okay, Civil War, and drawing the line back up to your ancestry. No, you understand your ancestry and then connect it back to this other outside stuff that's going on. Stay inside the house of your history and your story.
Stay inside the house of your history for your story. We doing it backwards. Man, I never thought of it
whatever
like
way
that.
You can do that, whether you're in the capacity to homeschool or not. For us, homeschooling is the only way.
Yeah.
So people will say, well, what is, do you think you're like, no, we have no interest that they will ever go back into
please.
Public education.
Come on now.
Ever.
Yeah.
No, we're about identifying other pieces, identifying your child's genius and allowing them to shine and get the support to be that. And, so.
But you will also, that curriculum would never even exist in a public school.
No.
It just wouldn't.
No.
Tell
so
me
that's why
about
you
your family. Dig into your roots.
Yeah. Why
Hell,
not?
it barely talked about other historical figures.
You're gonna learn through understanding, because like you say, our family histories are complex. You're gonna learn about the family traumas and the cycles of trauma that jump generations, and understand your own perspective and how to navigate much clearer if you start from your own perspective. You're gonna understand the health ailments that family members that you're most likely, if you were to have, depending on the environment or where you are, that you may or may not, based on those cycles and how things jump generations. You're going to understand, everything. What foods should you be eating? And how did they eat it? A lot of times, we say that, and I even say that, like, eat the food and, grow what they grow, but it's a little bit more to that, but you want to start with that. It's more to that.
And you keep adding on, and you keep adding, and it's never ending. Yeah. Because then your sons have to do the work.
They got to do the work. They better.
They better do the work.
They better.
You better do the work. Whoa. I was listening to another podcast yesterday. I love listening to other podcasts. I listen to mine all the time. In case anybody's wondering, I do re-listen to my episodes. But I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and I need to catch up because I'm at probably at episode 12. Not sure if you're familiar with this podcast called Earn Your Leisure.
No.
Two brothers in New York City, in New York. I think New York, probably in the state. But it's a podcast for Black people and how to build wealth. It is powerful. I mean, I think when they started, their numbers like skyrocketed. They were like top 10 podcasts, like worldwide, something like that. I don't know. Black Enterprise. I mean, it's been covered by every single, a lot of publications, a lot of media spotlight on them. But two amazing brothers that are saying, listen, we need to build Black wealth, and this is how you're going to do it. It's dope. Yes. They had
I'm here for that.
Valencia Clay, I think that's her last name, who is a school teacher and educator out in Baltimore City. She's from Harlem. Very significant figure in the education world. Works, her school's in the inner city in Baltimore. A lot of us already know about Baltimore.
Did she write a book?
She did write a book.
What was it?
I can't remember the name, but she definitely wrote a book.
It was like, I know someone, this is a good friend of the family who mentioned that. I know the book. It's like black and white. It's like.
I have to Google it.
Okay. Sorry.
But no, you're right. No. I'm going to Google it in just a moment.
I'm familiar. Okay.
So if you go look her up. I mean, I think she's taking a hiatus. She's getting her PhD, or she's getting another degree at Johns Hopkins. Wow. She's studying like neurology, like the science of the brain. And I mean, she's really wants to take her teaching to a whole nother level. And one of the things that she said, and as we were talking about students and reading and educating, and how the system is set up that they aren't taught, to learn their history, their heritage, or anything like that. She was like, we need to teach students how to read. And she wasn't even necessary, because I was kind of confused in the beginning and at first, because I don't think she was saying like we need to physically teach them like read like word for word. The art of reading and how beautiful reading is, because that's coming. I went to public school. Anytime I had to read is because for a project, summer school reading. That was it. Yeah. And if we don't teach them, or if they don't catch on to like the beauty of reading and that it's beautiful and it's awesome and knowledge is power, we'll forever be confined to the system of not knowing because we aren't reading. And to catch them at an early age is very key, as as a dad. But she was like, we aren't teaching people how to read, and we need to do more of that to enjoy reading.
And comprehension, reading comprehension.
Comprehension.
Can you read? And what was this about? Can you say what you just read?
Exactly.
Not just as far as like literally what it said, to be able to add meaning to what was
absolutely.
Your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you all, some of you guys probably are familiar with Valencia, dope sister. She is extremely vocal. I mean, she's going to lay it all out for you. But she's a passionate school teacher and educator, especially with kids who are inner city kids, who have backgrounds, that aren't necessarily, probably glorious ones, ones that kids who come from the system, or families who are in the system, and really getting through to them. And she has a relatable style in the way she teaches her kids. But anyway, her work is significant, but that just really hit home for me, because I know coming up, and I know we're kind of in a different zone when you're in middle school, whatever, but I know us little brown kids, we were just reading because we had to read. Pretty much. I did notice that my white friends, they would read just because, and I don't know, it just hit home for me, because she was like, we really need to teach kids reading. Like, teaching them how to read is a whole nother thing, because I know the literacy, I'm not sure, I don't know the numbers behind it, but I'm sure they can be up. I know that there are some regions or some areas or counties where the test scores are still very low, but educating our kids. So not only are we not teaching our kids or educating kids on our history, But they're missing the piece of like, okay, reading is beautiful. Reading is power. You know, reading can probably get you into that school that you want to get into, or take you to a whole nother level,
Open to a whole new world.
A whole new world. A whole new world.
At least to a point to where we're able to get back to our and keep our oral functions, because that oral history and as other things with that
and she said it's whitewashed. She said the education is whitewashed.
It's whitewashed. Yeah, before that, the whitewashing of even reading and the pre-literate cultures and societies and peoples, and there's other aspects of what's it's pieces that we lost by not being oral people and becoming more literature dominant. So it's a balance in them, and what I find, but the books are where the story's at, and so we got to.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
We better put that information somewhere if we're not remembering them and telling them.
So we need to wrap up in a few moments, but I'm not closing the show out by shouting out a really great platform that I follow. Are you familiar with Know Your Caribbean?
Yes.
Amazing platform. Amazing platform. You guys need to actually go ahead and follow Know Your Caribbean. And it's actually spelled, it's exactly how it's spelled, Know Your Caribbean on Instagram. She might be on Facebook. I know they have there's a website, but I came across a post. You probably came across this. It was actually one of the last posts, right? And it says, "Dear schools, museums, institutions, TV stations, media, governments, I'm exhausted of this narrative that the slave trade is termed as Black history. It's not. It's yours as well. Actually, slavery shaped hundreds of years of European and American history, not just ours. So why are you still calling it Black history as if you played no role in it at all? Your selective memory or selective inclusion into this piece of history, all caps, that shaped you also, is insulting every time you sprinkle some kind of basic history lesson once a year as a token box. Once a year as a token box, ticking activity to make you feel you have been inclusive in your thought process. Do better, be more comprehensive, accept that this is your history too. In parentheses, oh yeah, in Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland, y'all are in that list too." I could have just
dissonance.
threw my phone across the room.
Cognitive dissonance, man. It's just to forget. And so our stories are so beautiful and elegant and nuanced. And that's why you have to look into your family, because then you find out things that don't fit, that are completely opposite of the narrative that you may have, if you got that lesson, whatever that lesson was in February, because you could be carrying on a story that's not your story.
Listen.
And you might be missing some pieces and forgetting and missing your own birthrights and land rights and birthrights. And there's some things that's written in there. You need to know your own history and find out. I'll leave it at that.
Every time I come across this brother, you might be standing on your stuff. Every time I connect with you, every single time. Again, I've been intentional ever since the last time. I have taken some steps. We can talk about. I have taken some steps, but I know that there's so many. Obviously, it's obvious because I haven't done a whole deep dive. There's so many pieces missing to the puzzle that I'm trying to pull together, and it's just always a steady reminder. Like you said, your genealogy, that you got to know it. You got to know it. And again, for me, that's Black History 365.
Yes.
Knowing where I come from, honoring my folks, honoring the land that they cultivated, remembering it, finding them photos. Because I'm showing up to Big Mom's house like, where they, I didn't ask a few times. Oh, they at such and such house. Oh, I'm going drive me there, okay? Because I got you.
And with smartphones, there's no excuse. You can take photos of the photo and edit it and throw whatever filter on it. And make it look like great. It look just like the regular photo. Let's be real. Like, Get those pictures and see those faces. See the faces. Look at them cheek lines.
Them cheekbones, yes.
Look at them cheekbones and all that. Look at those hands and those brows and
that
the
skin, that forehead.
Chin, that forehead, that noses and them lips. Look at all of that. That's
Geoff.
you.
Geoff, thank you so much for joining me. This was a pleasure. Where can folks find you at? Where can they visit you?
You can visit me. So you can definitely find me on Instagram in two spaces. So New Healing Arts Garden, still have that page. That's where I, just when the garden season is really active, even though outside of that time I post pictures about plants, what's going on there is my botanic project. Botanical project where I'm gathering plants and the stories. And then the other space, so that's New Healing Arts Garden. That's NU Healing Arts Garden. And then if you go to that page, you can find as to who's the garden keeper. That's me, and that is Geo_creative space. That's where I'm telling the stories through a visual art lens about all these plants and all these narratives and showing my take on how.
Tap into the brother, y'all.
I'm
He's
here.
Dope. Tap into him. All right. Peace, y'all.
Peace.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We are here live on Full Service Radio every Wednesday at 11 a.m., where you can catch today's episode on fullserviceradio.org, as well as iTunes and Spotify. Be sure to follow me at Food Talks in Color on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Are you an edible activist? Sure you are. Come join me on the show. I would love to feature you. Just shoot me a DM on the gram. Peace and blessings all. And remember, there is no culture without agriculture.